System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.
Hello, everyone. Very excited to have our first guest here on Inner City Left with us. My name is Amin TMK, alongside Moja Lil Tankley Sumler. We are incredibly excited to have Matt Sedillo with us today. We'll have more of his information in the bio later. Matt is the literary director of the Mexican Cultural Institute of Los Angeles. He has been hailed by journalists and historians alike as the best political poet in America, as well as the poet laureate of the struggle. Matt is the author of Mowing Leaves and Grass and City on the Second Floor. Thanks for being with us, Matt. I'm going to jump right into it. We've been hearing a lot on our end about this southern border crisis, and it always seems to be like this conservative dog whistle. I wanted to know sort of about the humanitarian crisis on the border and just your overall thoughts on what's going on there right now.
Well, yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me. What's going on right now is that you have the new governor, Greg Abbott, and he's blowing a lot of the I wouldn't even call it dog whistles at this point. I mean, he said basically directly that there's an invasion, that they need to militarize, and he's in the process of doing so, and calling for the National Guard, and you have Trump involved. You also have Biden talking about proposing the strongest legislation we've had in decades, and he's willing to join with Trump, or he's willing. He says, he actually, I think his direct quote was, "I invite you, Trump, to join me, or I'll join you." And so this is kind of typical of the Democrats, but I mean, with Biden, I think it's a kind of overdrive of this. The Republicans will move the country in a more fascist direction, and everyone will protest. And then when the Democrats come in, they tend to codify everything that the Republicans did. And so that's kind of what Biden is doing, and it's part of the Democratic playbook. It's what they do, but he is more ferocious about it. In the same way that Trump, his predecessors, if Trump was a more ferocious Republican than we're used to, then Biden is a equally ferocious legitimizer at a different level. So, that's what's happening right now. But this is not a new thing. I mean, it's what's unique about this era is that it's a lot of Central American migration coming from Honduras, coming from Guatemala, El Salvador, and so this kind of an issue of a large mass of Mexican labor coming in, or Mexican workers and Mexican people coming into the United States. It's moved more towards the Central American question, and there's historic reasons for that. I mean, over the past 3 decades, the United States has been viciously cooing and committing dirty wars and destabilizing these nations in many ways, which they have since the inception of those countries. But again, these things intensify. And as they intensify, so do the migratory patterns. But the question of the Mexican border, I mean, this is really, I think it's really important for people to understand that this is not a new question, and it's not a side question. The question of the border, the southern border, is definitive towards American politics. And the treatment of people who come out of the Mexican border into the United States and live in the United States, are born of the history of that border, are a very, very significant pillar in U.S. history. I mean, if you look at the Mexican-American War, when it happened, after it happened in California, you have the first basic statewide vagrancy laws. One's called the Protection of California Indians Act. One was called the Greaser Act, and then another one is the Foreign Miners Tax, which targeted Chinese and Mexican. But the initial one was the Indian Care Act, which basically allowed people to, it's a horrible euphemism, but it really basically was a vagrancy law to any person that was deemed a California Indian who was just kind of living their life and to be forced to work. And then later on, about a year or two later, they had the Greaser Act, which was subject to people who were deemed to be of Spanish and Indian blood. And so that, of course, is targeting Mexicans specifically. But both populations were targeted at that time period. So, but that's the first statewide vagrancy law. This is happening in the 1850s. And obviously, we would see later with Jim Crow and the Black Codes, that would happen in the South, and those would be, they'd see many more states. But at that time period, it's still slavery. So you don't really have those laws. So that's kind of like a part of the history. Also, people know they had the Miranda rights, but they don't actually know who Ernesto Miranda was. Ernesto Miranda was a Mexican guy in Arizona, and legal predecessor to that is Escobedo versus Illinois, which is where you had the right to an attorney. So these two big things, which are part and parcel of what everybody knows about their lives, they don't really know the roots and the history of it. So it's not that these questions are new or suddenly rising. They're fundamental to American history. And just because our understanding of them is not fundamental to American history doesn't mean that they aren't actually in reality.
Yeah, no, that's a great primer on these things. I think one of the things that's really interesting is how detached America is from history. Like their history happens and they think that it happens in a bubble. The Civil War ends and they think that slavery is over, when in fact most of the large landowners go into Central America and create these terms that people use and don't even understand, like Banana Republic. Like slavery didn't end in the United States. All of those landowners went into Central America. Some of them went to Brazil. I mean, there's even photos of Jimmy Carter hanging out with the Confederates or whatever they call themselves in Brazil. So like, I think that's wonderful background that you're giving on all of those things. And just to follow up, I remember when the Democrats, through virtue signaling, shut down the nation to stop Trump from building the wall. Meanwhile, Biden has built more of the wall than Trump did. And, people still talk about like, oh, he's not doing anything, when we have at least 3-president trend of each of the last presidents being the person that deported more people across the southern border than any other president in history. First, it was Barack Obama. Then it was Trump. And now it's Biden. Like these trends continue to increase. And I think just another big hole on this whole thing is, if you're going to say it's a national security issue, then why is there no militarization of the northern border? Right? Like that's the only part I'm willing to half-ass believe is maybe a dog whistle. Oh, we need to set up a border, protect our nation. Okay, but there are multiple borders, right? There's please God, can we stop these Canadians from coming to America and stealing all the great jobs? Drake, talking to you.
Yeah, and it feels like to me, again, just the conversation surrounding white supremacy. There is just so many more white people and that are living in Canada as averse to brown and black people that are living in Mexico. Matt, I put you on mute just real quick because you had some background noise, but I'm gonna get you right back in the game. We're again, great conversations, everyone. I remember maybe 2 or 3 years ago, my memory fades me. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was outside of one of these border facilities in an all-white outfit with heels on, crying. There was the whole conversation during the Biden the candidacy when Trump was the president. Oh, they have the kids in cages. And it's so interesting now to see both of you mention that they're both building the wall. I've been reading a lot about how it's just disconnecting a lot of these natural migratory patterns for the wildlife there. Matt, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about sort of how this impacts not only, human life, obviously, but also, how it's just difficult again to close off this entire space and what that means for the population and the environment in the United States and the Mexican border.
Well, I think when you talk about closing off these natural migratory patterns of of wildlife, this is actually a natural migratory pattern of humanity as well. If you look at what's called the Uto-Aztecan languages, Uto-Aztecan, it stretches all the way down into South America, and it goes all the way up to parts of Idaho and even into Canada. So there's a family language that much like Latin stretches across portions of Europe, or Germanic language stretches across portions of Europe, or Turkish languages and Arabic languages stretch across different parts of the world. There's a Uto-Aztecan language family that stretches across patterns of this part of the world. That predate the borders as we understand them today. If you look at also the growing of corn. Corn is kind of an odd food. I don't want to exactly call it a GMO, but it's a non-chemical GMO. It's not actual food group that like grows out of land. It had to be produced and synthesized. And most historians say that it was synthesized in central Mexico, and it somehow has reached all over the North American plain. Well, that happened because people were in contact with each other. So there is something that predates these borders that, with or without Trump or with or without Obama, has been definitely disrupted. I mean, not just disrupted by Anglo-America, I'm also disrupted by Spanish colonialism, French colonialism, and all these things that predated in parts of the world. But what they're doing and what they have been doing, what they've always been doing, is an affront to nature. It's an affront to humanity. It's a general affront overall when you look at the very, very, very big picture. But look at the small picture. What is this doing to families? I mean, you're talking about families being separated. You're talking about, I mean, I don't have anything to add to that conversation that's not already been said. It's a really simple thing. I mean, they're stripping children from their parents. They are moving them into facilities, and then they are not telling them where they are going. And when children do get out, I know a case, a friend of mine who works, with Central American migrant, the Central American migrants, who works with caravans. I was talking to him one time, and he was telling me about how I mean, he wasn't talking to me specifically when we were talking in a group, but like he was telling us all how this kid that they had that he knew just came, is out now, and he's no longer being held in detention, but he's radically changed. His mind's just gone. I mean, and he went in when he was like 9, and now he's like 13. And he's just there's no telling what happened to him in there. So it's horrible. I mean, for the kids, even the kids that aren't lost or don't die or whatever. I mean, even when they get out, it's a horrible, horrible experience. And the United States is one of the very few countries that actually imprisons children. That's a whole other conversation. But I mean, it's a linked conversation.
It's the same conversation, yeah.
It's a linked conversation, definitely. But it's the way that they are incarcerating children, the way that they are like essentially gauging these kids it's one of the great fronts to humanity. It's really it's really shocking to me, like how little or how quickly the American public can move on. But it really shouldn't shock me. I mean, look what's going on right now in Palestine and how much of like people get really upset and then kind of just move on really fast. I mean, I should never really be surprised at people's ability to just kind of move on or just move around. I mean, I guess I'm guilty of it too, but like it's when you really sit down and think about what they've done, it's truly horrific, and it's extended from, I mean, these places began with Obama. I mean, Trump definitely escalated, and Trump definitely escalated the rhetoric. I never ever want to say that Trump was a normal president, or that's just kind of the way things are. Because I mean, what he did so specifically was essentially deputize, every white racist in America. That's what he did at a level that's not typically done in this country, or hasn't been done for a while. And so I don't want to say that it's not unique or it's not a particular horror, but in terms of what the state does, it was business as usual, and it's continued before and after him.
And again, this language it continues to be upgraded. I mean, you have the president of the United States at the State of the Union talking about illegals, right? Like these are things that are not supposed to be the foray of Democrats. I think about one of the things that comes to my mind the most is the dual consciousness that works in America, right? Especially conservative and evangelical Americans who believe that Israel has a right to return for 2,000 years plus of history, but then want to see a border that's made into a wall, and then effectively saying that the Mesoamericans that have lived in these lands from time immemorial do not have a right to return. I think another thing that's really interesting to me is, at least from a socioeconomic point of view, it seems that most of the people that migrate to America are at least culturally sympathetic, because as you mentioned, and I want to tap in with you a little bit more, Matt, most of these people are running away from the socialist nations that have been destabilized by the American government. Can you speak a little bit more about that as it relates to Central America?
Yeah, I'd love to. I just want to say one more thing to address Mean's point earlier, though, is that when people say the immigrants, right? They typically, if they don't specify they're talking about Cambodian immigrants or Haitian immigrants, they mean Mexicans, Central Americans, right? So that word immigrant has been associated with certain population. And so when we say we have an immigration problem, or we need to change our immigration policy, or we need to have more compassion for the immigrants, or whatever, it kind of, in a way, it deracializes, or it ahistoricizes, or whatever, this concept of the immigrant. Trump is not anti-immigrant. I mean, Trump spoke about the idea of bringing in, like, why don't we get it from good countries like Sweden? This. Trump is actually the son of an immigrant. His mother is a Scottish immigrant. Joe Arpaio, who was a big part of his campaign, is the son of 2 Italian immigrants. These people are not anti-immigrant per se. They're anti-Mexicans. They're anti-Central American. They're anti-Salvadoran. They're anti-Honduran. They're anti-brown people coming from the southern border. That's who they're anti. They're anti, people who are, have the blood of the original peoples of this hemisphere. That's who they are against. That is who they are opposed to. So that is I want to make that really, really clear to the audience, that when the people say anti-immigrant or talk about immigration policies, this is what they're talking about. When Trump lost the election, the popular vote to Hillary Clinton, he said that there was like millions and millions of illegals in California. Those were his words, right? And when he went to Japan, he was talking to the very fascist president at the time over there, Abe. He said that, you would never get elected in America because of 30 million Mexicans. Now, nobody estimates that there are 30 million undocumented Mexicans in the United States. That number 30 million is actually how many Mexican Americans there are. How many people born in the United States of Mexican descent. That's what that number 30 million actually is. And it's actually more like 34 million, but like that's what that number is. And so that is a wild statement. He also talked about bringing back Operation Wetback, and he talked about bringing back, elements of the Mexican Repatriation Act and keeping families together, meaning anyone would be subject to removal. I would be subject to removal. My grandfather was born in Denver, and he actually was deported in the 1930s during the Mexican Repatriation Act. And so, I don't know. Yeah. But as to speak to the question of Central America and the governments there, I mean, when you had a leftist government, in the 50s, people know about this, or Benz and United Fruit. That was one of the biggest examples. But that kind of stuff continued for many, many years. I mean, like, you looked into what happened with with Nicaragua and the Contras and the fight against the Sandinistas, who were attempting to nationalize all their industries. I mean, that fight. It was a horrible, bitter, protracted war that the United States funded. And if you look at, where that even came from, where Sandinista's name comes from, it comes from Augusto Sandino. And Sandino was fighting against, the rail interests back in the day. He was fighting about the vestiges of of the Vanderbilts, So like this guy, and Somos took over, and then later on it's United Fruit. And this happens in Guatemala, it happens in Nicaragua, but most recently in Honduras, when they had the election of a leftist president there. I believe his name was Ayala. He again modest reforms, and that was too much for the U.S. government. And they started, cracking down on people and murdering people. I mean, what's her name? Berta Caceres. I mean, she was a great environmental activist out there, murdered at the hands of the state. And she is just it's not just they killed her. I mean, she's just one face of it, but she's one individual, and an outstanding individual, a hero. But that's not just one person. They're murdering activists in Honduras, and some people, Honduras is one of I think between Honduras and El Salvador, those 2 largest countries that make up the migratory caravan. So. Yeah, I mean, this is, but it's a pattern that goes way back. I mean, the history of the United States in Central America is one of the most naked and brazen ones. I mean, with United Fruit, with their competitor, I can't remember the name of the company, but it was run by a guy named Sam the Banana Man. The rule, the Somoza family, the sheer open nature of how the United States viewed as just vassal states. It's just, just it's a place to be exploited. Central America is among, it's among the most explicit, just no, absolutely no,
And
no
again,
edifice, no, the mask was off.
I think it goes back to, again, Americans not understanding the context of the history they're taught. Most Americans are taught, oh, there was a Monroe Doctrine, and it was this benevolent doctrine where the United States decided they were going to protect any nation on this hemisphere from European aggression. Yeah, but that's the protection racket, which we all know is gangster shit. Like, if you say you're under my protection, that means I now have taken control of you and everything that applies to you. So essentially what the Monroe Doctrine is, it's just the United States declaring all of this is part of our empire, and we will do whatever we please here under the auspices of protecting these people from European expansionism.
Absolutely. And the what's called the Spanish-American War was mostly fought against Philippines. It was mostly fought against Philippines, who were trying to, and Cubans as well, but and Puerto Ricans, but like mostly fought against, the Philippines was the largest country that they were trying to possess after kicking Spain out. But so it isn't even on this hemisphere. But that was the largest Spanish possession and the largest resistance movement to the United States. So that. The Monroe Doctrine and all this kind of like spreading democracy across the world. I guess it's spread beyond the Western Hemisphere into the whole world now. It's just it's the lies Americans like to tell themselves. America's unique in that way, I think, or it's not that unique, but America it brought a certain like hypocritical panache to the imperial game that I don't think France and England were as big on. They were more, I don't know. There was.
No, I think you're 100% right. Again, when you think about the British Empire, it was a civilizing mission, right?
Yeah.
When you think of the Romans, we're doing it for the glory of Rome. When we're talking about the Spanish, God, gold, and glory. But the American Empire is unique in that it refuses to acknowledge itself for what it is, even though you have a CENTCOM, an AFRICOM, AMERICOM, whereas the military essentially has split the entire world into these areas under the control of certain military factions. What is that if not empire?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is just a phenomenal conversation. Anyway, I didn't even mean to cut you off, Matt. I just wanted to, again, I'm learning a lot. Matt, I wanted to get to your reaction to this. This is about a month ago. The president of Mexico, as we call him, AMLO, he gave out a few demands during the conversation with Biden surrounding the Mexican border. He was saying he wants to deploy $20 billion to help Mexican and Central American countries deal with the root causes of migration, while also calling for wholesale changes to the U.S.-Cuba policy. We're going to help as we always do, Lopez Obrador said in a Friday speech. Mexico is helping reach agreements with other countries, in this case, Venezuela. We also want something done about the differences with Cuba. We've already proposed to President Biden that the U.S.-Cuba bilateral dialogue be opened. He also said he wants the U.S. to provide visas to at least 10 million migrants living in the U.S. for 10 years or longer. I just wanted you to react to that, and emoji you as well.
So I think AMLO is he's hilarious. He really reminds me of because people are always in this country always trying to put their finger on AMLO, like what is he? Is he this? Is he that? And I really see AMLO as kind of in the tradition of like the kind of the Bolivarians, like Hugo Chavez and Rafael Correa, Evo Morales. Very much a reformer, very much somebody that is trying to keep the resources within the country. And so I wouldn't exactly say he's like a threat to capital existential existence, some of that, but he definitely is trying to reverse a lot of the processes. And so what he said is perfectly in line with what Rafael Correa, actually the president of Ecuador during that period, had said about building renewing a U.S. military base in Ecuador when he was kicking them out. He said that he would gladly keep the military base, if America allowed Ecuador to build a military base in Florida. And so that was it. So AMLO saying these things that he knows, the United States is not going to do, but really kind of like exposing the hypocrisy of the U.S. state. I think it's wonderful. I mean, it's the same kind of panache, that same kind of humor, the same kind of a way of operating that reminds me a lot of the Bolivarians. So yeah, I think that my response to AMLO in general. I mean, for those who don't know, AMLO, he was the mayor of Mexico City for many years and did many great reforms there. There's some really great within Mexico, within the Constitution that came out of the revolution. There are some really great worker protections. There are some really great land reform issues. There's all these things that just largely ignored by the Mexican government that was in place for so many years, and then the PAN was even worse. And so, all the really strong social protections that existed in Mexico came out of a 6-year period. This guy Lázaro Cárdenas in the early 30s, and that's when Pemex was established, the protection of the oil. So a lot of the land reform took place. Very much. Lázaro Cárdenas is the best president in Mexican history, but definitely the best president in the history of in modern history of Mexico. But then within 6 years, all after his term, every president since tried to undermine it until AMLO. AMLO originally came out. He was a big part of the party called PRD, and the PRD was formed by actually Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, who was actually Lázaro Cárdenas' son. And basically, the two leading figures of that were Cuauhtémoc and AMLO. And so they kept cheating the PRI. They kept cheating the PRD. The PRD clearly won an election under Cárdenas, and they stole from him. Then they later clearly won an election under AMLO and stole from him. And then they formed a new party, Morena, and that party had such overwhelming support from the people. Basically, being more, like I said, being a little more, like the Bolivarians, being a little less diplomatic and talking a lot more shit is kind of like the Moreno vibe, and I think that's largely why they won by such an overwhelming majority that they couldn't be stolen. And it looks like his successor looks like she's going to win the election as well. So it looks like Moreno's going to be in power for a while. So that's a really great thing. That's a great thing for the hemisphere. That's a great thing for the people of Mexico, and that's a great thing for the world. For Mexico not to be in the clutches of the United States.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I would think some very simple things they could do to continue this trend to show that, he's planting his own flag would be simple things like legalizing marijuana. Like when you're talking about a country that has such an incredible agricultural base, when you're talking about the ways that markets are opening up, especially in places like Thailand, and there are places in Central America, right? When you do those kind of things, one of the first things that does is it removes any type of partnership you would be having with things like the DEA, which then turn to chipping away at your national autonomy. So long as there are federal governments from the United States that technically should have no jurisdiction in these nations, having all of the rights and protections of Americans, but also legal law enforcement in the nations that they're essentially occupying. To say nothing of, again, these are little things you can do for the people, but more than for the people, these are huge economic boons. So those are the kind of things I would like to see. Perhaps an application for BRICS. That there's definitely a need for a BRICS nation in North America. I think Mexico would probably be a good fit for that. Those are the kind of things that I think that he could do to further plant his flag as far as like being his own man and taking Mexico into another direction.
Yeah.
Well, I think Mexico and Brazil are two largest economies in Latin America. I mean, they're by far. And collectively, I think Brazil is actually like the 9th or so largest economy in the world. I think Mexico is like the 15th or 16th. So they're on the world stage. They are actually large economic countries. And if there were to be some way in which Mexico could get in this, what Brazil is doing with Russia, India, and China, that would be another very large. Another large partner in that move away from American hegemony.
Let me ask both of you this. I mean, if something like that were to happen, and I believe Mexico was in the conversation being a part of BRICS. Where does the United States? I feel like they wouldn't be too excited about Mexico joining the BRICS. How do you think they would react, and do you think that that would have a negative impact on their relationship?
There's already a negative impact on their relationship. I mean, look at the New York Times was running these stories on AMLO, trying to basically give him the Putin treatment, basically like he's this, he's that. Same stuff they did with Chavez. It's a real sad thing that Lula over in Brazil and AMLO weren't actually in power in the time of the Bolivarian Revolution, in the time of Chavez and Morales and Correa, and when all that was going on. They definitely would have been huge allies to that. I mean, and the Kirchners in Argentina as well. So I mean, there's criticism to be made of all these governments. I mean, I don't want to say like they're the be all end all, but they're definitely a move away from where things are. But I think AMLO, just the steps he's already taken, has put a huge target on his back, in the American media. I mean, he's often portrayed that even on like little leftist kind of stuff. I mean, he's portrayed as like he's portrayed as like I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of like weird criticisms of him, but like I think that if he were to do that, it would just intensify. I mean, it would intensify. But the thing about AMLO though, man, is that he is very similar to Chavez. Like he will, if you play a dirty trick on him, he'll play a dirty trick on you. I mean, the journalists who wrote these like crazy stories about him, I think he ended up like responding to them and like and basically calling them out by their names and encouraging people to write letters to them, and they got flooded with letters and they're like, oh my God, we're being doxxed by this brown man, but like that's what happens. I don't know. So yeah, so we'll see how it goes. But yeah, the more he does, the more it's gonna get. The worse it's gonna get in terms of that. But the better it'll be for the people.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're at an end of subtlety in the American empire. I think there was a time that a move like that probably would have got Langley involved. At this point, with the economic de-dollarization that's happening, the potential loss of American revenue by moving away from the dollar system and moving more towards a de-dollarized BRIC system, I think you would see a response from Department of Defense. I think it would be beyond Langley at this point. I think we're past soft power and soft coups. I think we're past Arab Springs and things like that. The American empire just simply does not have room for the time it takes to cultivate those type of movements. And they haven't shown a great track record of keeping control of the installed governments anyway. And so, a move that certain that there's no way it would not be described as explicitly anti-American, and it will become, they would maybe use immigration as a casus belli. There would be a casus belli because you can never admit, oh, you're de-dollarizing and that threatens our economic hegemony. But yeah, that to your answer, I feel like it would be beyond, it would not be a soft response.
Yeah, I would just say that the only thing I would say, I mean, yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, but I mean, how far the United States is willing to take hostilities with Mexico is an open question. It really is. I mean, because, the United States the leadership of the United States is pathological, and they're willing to, destroy and blow up the world to turn a profit, so the level of their just how the level of psychopathy is an open question. I would say this though, during Trump's run for president, the places where his rallies were shut down were in Arizona, San Jose, Orange County. These are places where there was physical confrontation in the streets because of what this man was saying. Also, Chicago, there was a shutdown there, and there was definitely a coalition there. But all these places that there were actual shutdown, not just protests, but actually like shut down, all had large Mexican populations. If the United States were to go to war with Mexico, with 30 million Mexican Americans, now there's a lot of people in this country that are complete sellouts and whatever, and they're just going to back, my country to the, whatever. There's a lot who won't, and there's 30 million. It's not like bombing a country where there's a population where the population in here is like less than 3% of the country or something like this. There's 30 million. It's 10% of the country, and beyond that, the broad-based, Rasa population, the brown population, the Latinx population, whatever you call it, is about 54 million. So there's an additional group of people with some affinity to that population that would not be happy about that. So it's literally like 20% of the country. So it would be very, very different. It would be very, very different. So it's an open question. It's an open question how far they're willing to take this.
And to your point of solidarity, Matt, I just also wanted to touch on this. Is a question also for both of you. Almo also wanted to. He also addressed sort of the blockade of Cuba and how that's just affecting Cuba and has for decades, and sort of that solidarity, and just maybe either of you could just talk a little bit about the blockade and maybe even what that means for Mexicans and again their solidarity with the Cubans.
So Mexico's always been in solidarity with Cuba. I mean, even under the Comprador type governments, they've always been in some level of strong solidarity or to some level of solidarity with Cuba. Many Comprador type Mexican presidents. I believe Kennedy was trying to convince one of them to say, and this guy, I can't remember the name of the Mexican president right now, but he wasn't anything special. He was definitely a sellout. But he told him, he's trying to convince him to get on board with we need to stop Cuba and its threat. And he said, if I go to the people that 50 million Mexicans will die laughing if I tell them that Cuba is a threat to the United States. The idea of absurdity that Cuba is a nation island of 11 million people living their best life is somehow a threat to this juggernaut, this imperial juggernaut is it's a joke, and it's always been a joke in Mexico. And the ties of the Cuban Revolution to Mexico City are deep. I mean, Fidel Castro met Che Guevara in Mexico City. That's a fact. I mean, if you go to Mexico City, there's a Cafe Havana. You go to Cafe Havana, there's pictures of the two of them all across, and their meetings there in Mexico City. So the rich history, the connection between Mexico, specifically Mexico City, and the Cuban Revolution is really deep. It's really, really deep. And to all leftist movements in Latin America, really, I mean, a lot of stuff comes through Mexico City. A lot of people meet there. It's like Paris or something. It's like the Paris of Latin America. People go there and they meet and they intellectualize. Marquez lived there for a while, and so it's really a magical place. But it has a deep connection to the Cuban Revolution, and the Cubans remember, and the Mexicans remember. So I think that, and particularly when there's a more leftist Mexican president, the solidarity gets much deeper. I mean, the last thing I want to say, Cardenas was really in Cardenas, who wasn't the president at the time, just a kind of retired old man at the time. He was a vocal advocate for the Cuban Revolution when most countries in Latin America were denouncing it because they were part of the OAS, and so, he was a vocal, whatever, supporter of it. The last thing I want to say about Cardenas is during the Spanish Revolution, when Franco was fighting the Spanish Civil War, Mexico was the only country to support Spain. Mexico and Soviet Union were the only country to support the Spanish Republic against the fascist Franco. So Mexico has a very, very strong leftist tradition, or at least a struggle, anyways, that moves pretty far to the left, far to the left of anything we're used to in the United States, far to the left of FDR or Bernie Sanders or whatever we consider, a move in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, Frida Kahlo is dating Trotsky in Mexico City. I mean, it doesn't get more radical than that. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about Cuba, the problem with Cuba is the same problem that the 18th century America had with Haiti, or the 21st century America still has with Haiti. You can never have a group successfully break away from European hegemony on their own terms. No one gets to be independent. First, it was Haiti under Toussaint, and then it became Cuba under the communist. And so you can never have a successful example of socialism, especially not on this hemisphere. The United States government will not allow it. Of course, they'll let you have softball socialism in places like Sweden, where they're, again, ethnically speaking, 95% Swedish, right? The same way where the quote unquote most progressive places in America are places like Portland, where once again, demographically speaking, it's kind of homogenous. But Cuba stands as a glaring example of what could be done, and that it is possible to get away from the Western system. They can never be allowed to be successful. And I think that's something that goes beyond Democrat or Republican. It will never change. Yeah.
Okay.
And having been to Cuba, there's a lot of the machinery, a lot of the buildings are old and breaking down, but the way in which things are circulated is not. I mean, the socialist system there, people don't go hungry. There's no one in the streets. People aren't, whatever. I mean, I remember getting back there like, oh yeah, the Cuban government, they're very good at hiding that from people. Like, yes, brother, I'm so important that when I came to Havana, they were like, quick, let's hide all our homeless. Matt Sedillo's coming. We'll be embarrassed the shit he's seeing. I said, what the hell are you talking about? Like they put an invisibility cloak over it, like Wakanda or something. Like, no, man, there's no, like, you don't see any homeless people. You don't see people starving. I mean, you do see like a restaurant being like, we ran out of bread. And you're like, oh, I'm like, yeah, or something else. But other than that, I mean, yeah.
What is the West if not projection, right? I mean, we have it for a fact that Xi was not even coming to the United States last year to the technology conference in San Francisco because he's like, it bums me out looking at all these homeless people. We don't have this in China, and it bothers me mentally, right? And then like America goes to this big, huge cleanup in San Francisco just to get Xi to come here for our president to be like, oh, this dictator. And it's like, I didn't want to come here, man. So it's all projection. It's always projection. And that's what the West does.
Yeah, there was another leader. I can't remember who it was, that went to China. He was the prime minister, and he was like saying that he was visiting all the cities. And he was like, there's no homelessness. I don't even see trash on the street. And you look at all these other countries. I was talking about this a little earlier in one of our other videos, how America is not modern. And the more you move around the world, the more you see how, we don't even have to talk about like the bridge in Baltimore and how we're seeing the infrastructure of the United States just slowly fall apart. We can look at other countries and other places in the world and see how well they're doing, and the United States is not.
It's wild. I mean, right now I'm actually joining you from Florence, Italy, and Italy is right now in supposedly the most right-wing government they've had since Mussolini, and I believe them. But when I was in the South, in Bari, I was staying in an anarchist barracks that had been taken from the army, and I was like, "How do you guys keep the water and electricity going?" And they're saying the government wouldn't cut us off. That'd be inhumane. So I mean, like, in the most right-wing government they've had since Mussolini, it is still a far more decent place than every day.
Right? It's a Mussolini.
It's his grandfather. It is
That's
his
what I'm
grandfather.
saying.
Yeah,
It's a link.
It is. Yeah. No, I'm not saying that it isn't, and I'm not saying that she isn't doing horrible things. I'm not saying those things aren't happening. The standard of living isn't dropping, and people aren't suffering, and that there's not a. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying everyday America is more fascist than like the biggest right-wing turn in decades in Italy. Just everyday normal America. Under Bill Clinton, it was worse than it is. Under Bush the first. I mean, whatever. Just regular everyday America. Way worse than the right-wing term in Europe.
I try to look at these people, these politicians, dispassionately, right? And I think about Maloney and the speech she gave maybe 6 months ago when she's like, and the only reason we have an immigration problem is because France continues to colonize Africa and they won't let Africans make it. And you're like, wow, oh my God, I'm having to agree with this fascist. Oh God. Politicians are fascinating people.
It's like when you remember we were watching briefly, we were at a hotel and we were listening to MSNBC, and there was a former colonel that was on there, and she was like, why can't the Democrats be the party of national security? Why can't we be the And I think you're seeing this rapid militarization on both sides where there's not really another option. There's no anti-war. I mean, there is an anti-war option. We see third parties, but obviously they're not going to. Anyway, I don't want to go down too far. That's a whole separate conversation.
Podcast for another day.
Yeah. I wanted to get out.
Yeah, I mean, bring me back on another time. We'll talk about third parties. I'm down.
Matt, we would love to have you back. Again, I appreciate you for your time and also fitting us into your schedule. I do have one more question for you before we get out of here. And I just wanted to ask a little bit about the resistance movements in Central America and what can you tell, like, sort of us and maybe just a primer or currently or historically. I just wanted to throw that out there to you.
Well, I mean, like historically, I would tell people to read the work of Roberto Lovato. I mean, definitely much more of an expert on the subject than I am. You can, a general primer on Latin America, read the work of Eduardo Galeano, just to understand the 19th and 20th century. Lovato right now, though, I would follow him to get to really up-to-date stuff that's going on. It's in Central America and specifically El Salvador. Yeah, there's a lot of great organizations. Look at the work of Carceran, I think in Carecan in Los Angeles. It's probably the largest organization that helps out Central Americans. I definitely look into the groups that are helping the migrant caravans themselves. I mean, like it was called Pueblos Sin Fronteras. That Pueblos Sin Fronteras. That's like one of the big support groups. And so yeah, just educate yourself, inform yourself on those groups, and a lot of them need monetary support, and they need all kinds of other support. So find a way to get involved and do that.
And if you can tell our viewers where to find you and your work, Mr. Matt Sedillo.
Oh yeah. Just Google Matt Sedillo, and my books and stuff will come up. There's several ways to buy them. You don't have to support Amazon, so you can get them on. I don't know. You get them on Barnes Noble or something. I don't think that Barnes and Noble is just some type of whatever. But Amazon, my God. I mean, in 15 years, Jeff Bezos is going to own everything. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. I'd love to come on one day and just talk about like the new tech billionaires and how they've amassed a fortune, because people don't know. I mean, what Jeff Bezos did, he lost money for the first 15 years. I was doing research for this new project. He lost money for the first 15 years simply in order to destroy the competition. And then did what he did. So I mean, the story of these people was insane. So don't buy it on Amazon. That's just as much as I like to see my Amazon numbers go up. Don't do that. Support something else. But yeah, you can look me up, and then on that you can go to elmartillo.com. El Martillo is the publishing house I'm running now with David Romero. Yeah, and support our authors. Buy books directly from us. That'd be great.
Yeah, support local bookstores. Again, I'll try to put all of your information in the bio, Matt. We're very excited to have you again. We appreciate your time. I learned a lot. Before we get out of here, I just want to remind y'all, patreon.com/InnerCityLeft. I do want to give a shout out to our patrons, Lissa, Lauren, Suzette, and Dennis. Much love to everybody who tuned in. You can always get these cool Inner City Left shirts. Are you wearing one, Thanky? One of these Inner City Left shirts? Yes, you look amazing. And yeah. Peace out, guys.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.